This is the case of Willie Joe Sanford. If you want to know more about this case, please continue watching.
You are watching Roll a Mile in My Shoes TV.
Willie Joe Sanford's body, decomposed, was pulled out of Limestone Creek in Hawkinsville, Pulaski County, Georgia, on March 1st, 1957, after it had been in the water for nearly a month. Trussed to underwater growth, his head had been struck with a sharp instrument and his body had many stab wounds. He had been missing for a month. Certainly, it did not take a brave man or men to accomplish this execution, Circuit Judge John K. Wiley said in instructing a grand jury. Only a frenzied mob could have accomplished it. The judge later called in reporters to clarify that while he thought at least 2 people were involved, he was not calling it a lynching. The prosecutor, J. Wade Johnson, told a reporter that he believed 2 white people had been involved in the killing, but said he did not think it was racially motivated. Had there been a racial issue, it would have not been concealed. They'd have riddled him with bullets in the middle of the road or strung him up to a tree and made no effort to hide it. The Afro-American newspaper reported that the local grand jury investigation had been fuddled. In some ways, I agree with the newspaper saying that the local investigation had been fuddled or basically had been, sloppy and not done in proper way to, collect evidence and preserve the body and things of that nature so that it can be properly examined. This is true. And even though they didn't, quote unquote, make any, gestures to suggest that it was racially motivated, does not mean that it could not have been. Look at Emmett Till's case. He was basically thrown into a river and, had a cotton gin fan around his neck. That's not a normal lynching, as you would call it. That does not mean that it was not racially motivated. So in this case, I think the same thing because, the man had been missing for a month and then they finally pulled his body, which was decomposed and, in other reports that I read, they call it waterlogged. So by the time they got to his body, it was all, already decomposing and things of that nature. And, wildlife had basically taken over his body. So, they could have done a better job to preserve his body for collecting evidence and, trying to get some DNA or something off. But they didn't do this. So it kind of, left a mess with evidence or lack thereof for the jury to decide on if his case was racially motivated, or I guess they're trying to say that he accidentally drowned, or if it was just a fight that had gone wrong between a black man and possibly two white people. But that's neither here nor there. I think that they should have done a better job in preserving evidence in this case, which they clearly did not do. And the more I read into this case, I get a kind of idea of, I guess, the kind of man that he somewhat was. He was actually a 24-year-old sawmill worker. And when he was found in the water or pulled from the water, his hands had been tied over his head and his body had been wired to undergrowth in the creek. And his skull had been fractured by a blunt instrument. And he had been stabbed numerous times in the chest, stomach, and back. Now, with this man being a 24-year-old sawmill worker, a lot of people know that to work in places like that, you have to be, willing to, I guess, take on rigorous jobs and sometimes, lift heavy, objects and, basically work with, high powered tools, which, back then especially was not easy because we didn't have all that technology back then that we have today. So it's not like this man was basically just, some out of shape older person. Not saying that our older people are out of shape, but he was more fit and could basically, hold his own better than an older person would be able to. So this kind of gives you, somewhat the type of person or the, physical side of him that these people probably would have been dealing with, when they approached him to either do whatever they did or to fight him. So this leads me to believe that, he was probably attacked by two people, like the judge said. Because, this man's hands were tied, and I don't think that this man would be able to tie his own hands in the way that they were tied and just, throw himself in, the creek. And not to mention the stab wounds that he had to his stomach, his back, and his chest. That even adds more, to it, because in order to stab somebody, you have to be up close and personal, and you have to, really just, have some force with it. And normally when people, stab people, like I said, it's up close and personal. So that means that there's some type of rage and obvious intent there. So I think, like I said before, they should have done much better in preserving the body to collect DNA evidence, hair fibers, and all that kind of stuff. But yet again, this was 1957, so DNA was not a thing back then. And even if it wasn't as good as we have today. So they probably didn't think to do all that. I can only, just say they did the best that they could with the knowledge they had at the time, which I think that, with him being in the water for as long as he was, there should have been, some evidence, even if it was little to none. There should have been something that they could have collected off of his body had it been handled properly, had the crime scene been handled properly. But, they didn't, do those, they didn't do the kind of procedures that we do today to preserve a crime scene, collect evidence from the victim's body and everything. They just did, what they knew to do, which was basically just, get the body, take it to the morgue, and just leave the rest for the coroner or whoever performs the autopsy. Shortly after he was pulled out of the creek, an autopsy was done, and it determined that he, the victim, had been missing since February 2nd of that year, which was 1957, and had likely been in the creek for about 30 days. And that is really strange because, I mean, his family didn't report him missing. His job didn't call his family saying, hey, we haven't seen him at work in a couple of days. We need him to come in or he's going to get fired. I mean, nobody was looking for this man. This is really strange. And he was in that creek for possibly 30 days. That doesn't sound, right, or and it certainly doesn't sound less suspicious now that I know that he could have been in that water for at least 30 days. Now the sister of Mr. Willie Joe Sanford was able to identify him from his shoes and a scar on his abdomen. Now, it turns out that Mr. Sanford had been shot a year before his death by a white man, and the scar on his abdomen was from the surgery to remove the bullet. Now, I'm not saying that this person who shot him the year before is guilty, but what if that man felt like since he didn't finish him off, he was going to come back when it was convenient for him and finish him off, but possibly bring a friend to help him finish him off to ensure that he got the job done this time. I'm not saying that this actually happened, but this is just a theory of mine. But if you guys like this video, please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.